Welcome to History of the Popes, the podcast that delves into the lives and legacies of those remarkable figures who have shaped the Catholic Church across the centuries. In this episode, we turn our attention to Pope Callixtus I. His story, emerging from the shadows of the 3rd century, combines hardship, controversy, and profound mercy as a narrative that invites us to reflect on the very essence of Christian leadership in an age of persecution and theological ferment. As we embark on this journey, we'll trace his path from the depths of servitude to the heights of the papacy, all while navigating the stormy seas of schism and accusation. So, let us begin. To understand Callixtus, we must first step back into the world of late 2nd century Rome, a city pulsating with the grandeur of empire and the undercurrents of spiritual upheaval. The Roman Empire under Commodus and his successors was a place of stark contrasts: opulent palaces for the elite, squalid alleys for the enslaved, and an imperial cult that demanded unwavering loyalty from all. Christianity, still a fledgling faith, flickered like a candle in the wind, tolerated at times, but more often scorned as a subversive superstition. It was into this milieu that Callixtus was born, likely around the year 160, though the records are as fragmentary as the catacomb inscriptions that would later honour him. We know him primarily through the lens of his adversaries, men like Tertullian and Hippolytus, whose writings brim with vitriol. Yet even in their polemics we glimpse a man of unyielding spirit, a former slave whose life embodied the radical equality proclaimed by the gospel. Callixtus's origins were humble, indeed ignominious by the standards of his time. Tradition holds that he entered the world as a slave in one of Rome's great households, perhaps that of Carpophorus, a Christian functionary in the imperial court. Slavery in ancient Rome was not merely a condition of bondage, it was an erasure of personhood, a life of unremitting toil and vulnerability. Young Callixtus, sharp-minded and ambitious, sought a way out. With his master's backing, he launched a small banking venture, catering to fellow Christians who wished to deposit funds safely, away from the prying eyes of pagan authorities. It was a noble endeavour, reflecting the early church's communal ethos of mutual support. But fortune turned cruel. The bank faltered, whether through reckless investments or the economic tremors of the era, we cannot say, and debts mounted like storm clouds. Creditors inflamed pursued Callixtus through the streets. In a desperate bid for sanctuary, he fled into a synagogue, only to be dragged out and denounced with false charges. The consequences were swift and merciless. Condemned as a Christian agitator, Callixtus was shipped off to the mines of Sardinia, that infernal penal colony where the empire exiled its most reviled. The Sardinian mines were a living hell, men chained in sweltering darkness, hacking at veins of lead and silver, their bodies broken by exhaustion and disease. Day blurred into night in those lightless depths, where the air hung heavy with dust and despair. For Callixtus, this was no mere punishment, it was a forge for the soul. Amid the groans of fellow prisoners, many of them Christians condemned for their faith, he encountered the raw reality of discipleship. Here, in the bowels of the earth, the words of Christ echoed with visceral power. "Whatever you did for one of these least brothers of mine, you did for me." It was a confessor's crucible, transforming a wayward youth into a witness forged in suffering. Yet even in this abyss, glimmers of divine providence broke through. Around 190, during Commodus's erratic reign, a ray of hope pierced the imperial court. Marcia, the emperor's influential concubine and a secret sympathizer with the Christians, learned of the plight of these Sardinian exiles. Through her intermediary, the eunuch presbyter Hyacinthus, she petitioned Pope Victor I for a list of the imprisoned faithful. Victor, a man of bold diplomacy, complied, and Callixtus, perhaps by clerical error, perhaps by grace, found himself among the pardoned. Released after years of torment, his health shattered, he was granted a modest pension by Victor and sent to recuperate in Antium, that coastal haven south of Rome. There, in quiet exile, Callixtus nursed not just his body but his vocation. The scars of Sardinia marked him indelibly. He had tasted the empire's wrath and emerged with a deepened compassion for the marginalised, the broken, the forgotten. Nearly a decade passed in this liminal space, a period of gestation for the church as much as for Callixtus himself. Rome, meanwhile, simmered with theological tempests. Heresies like monarchianism threatened to fracture the fragile unity of the faithful. Gnostic speculations swirled, promising esoteric knowledge to the elite while scorning the simple piety of the masses. It was at this juncture that Zephyrinus was elected pope in 198. Zephyrinus swiftly summoned Callixtus to the Eternal City, ordaining him as a deacon. However, Callixtus's role would prove far more momentous. Zephyrinus appointed him superintendent of the Christian cemetery along the Via Appia, the Appian Way. These were the catacombs, those subterranean labyrinths that have captured the imagination of generations. Under Callixtus's stewardship, this burial ground blossomed into the church's first substantial property, a sacred trust amid persecution. He expanded the tunnels, carving out niches for the departed, adorning walls with frescoes of hope, the Good Shepherd, the anchor of faith, the fish, as symbol of Christ. Here, in the cool embrace of the earth, Rome's Christians found solace, their loved ones laid to rest, not in pagan necropolises, but in a space sanctified by prayer and memory. Callixtus's touch was practical yet profound. He relocated the community's cemetery from the Via Salaria to this more secure site, ensuring that even in death the faithful were gathered as one body. Little did he know that these very catacombs would one day bear his name, the catacombs of San Callisto, a testament to his quiet labour in building the church's enduring foundations. As Zephyrinus's health waned, the currents of controversy swirled ever fiercer around his deacon. Callixtus, with his Sardinian-honed mercy, began advocating for a more inclusive discipline. The church faced a dilemma as old as sin itself: how to balance justice and forgiveness. Rigorists like Tertullian, now ensnared in Montanist extremism, insisted on irrevocable excommunication for grave sins, arguing that once the soul was stained, it could never be fully rehabilitated. Hippolytus, a brilliant but prickly theologian and presbyter, echoed this call for unyielding purity, penning treatises that decried any softening of the law. Callixtus, however, saw in Christ's parables a different path. The prodigal welcomed home, and the thief on the cross promised paradise. Influencing Zephyrinus, he pushed for measured penance, public, rigorous, but ultimately redemptive, allowing reconciled sinners to receive communion after due satisfaction. When Zephyrinus died in December 217, or perhaps 218, for the chronologies blur like incense smoke, Callixtus was acclaimed Bishop of Rome by the faithful, but Hippolytus, outraged, refused to yield. Declaring himself the true guardian of orthodoxy, he set up a schismatic congregation, becoming the church's first antipope. Hippolytus lambasted Callixtus as a heretic and a lax innovator. Tertullian piled on, branding Callixtus a betrayer of apostolic rigour. Their portraits paint him as a vulgar upstart, the bankrupt slave turned ecclesiastical schemer whose theology was as slippery as the Tiber's banks. Callixtus was a pastor attuned to the church's maternal heart. His decrees on penance were not whims, but reflections of the gospel's boundless mercy, an early precursor to sacramental discipline. He affirmed the unity of God while safeguarding the distinct persons of the Trinity against modalist heresies, drawing on the best of Roman theological tradition. On marriage, he upheld indissolubility but extended compassion to the abandoned, recognizing the fractures of human frailty. And in ordaining deacons and priests from diverse backgrounds, even former slaves, he embodied the Pauline vision. There is neither slave nor free, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. His papacy was a bulwark against division, a quiet assertion that the church was for sinners, not saints alone. It was amid these shifting sands that Callixtus built not just catacombs, but community. He fostered the Titulus, a house church in Trastevere, where the Basilica of Santa Maria would later rise. In 222, as autumn leaves carpeted the forum, tumult erupted. Tradition, echoed in the 4th century Depositio Martyrum, attests to Callixtus's end, hurled down a well near his Trastevere oratory, his body left to the water's silence. A priest named Asterius, it is said, retrieved the remains under cover of night, entombing them with reverence. The Chiesa di San Callisto, erected in the 8th century on that hallowed ground, still guards the well's echo, a poignant reminder of martyrdom's quiet drama. Callixtus died, not in the blaze of arena spectacle, but in the anonymity of urban strife, his blood mingling with the church's growing chorus of witnesses. In the centuries since, Callixtus's legacy has endured like the catacomb's cool stone, unyielding, subterranean, profound. Venerated as a martyr, his feast on October 14th places him alongside Hippolytus, that former foe reconciled in death. His emphasis on penance foreshadowed the sacrament of reconciliation, a mercy that would sustain generations. His defence of Trinitarian orthodoxy amid schism prefigured the councils that would define dogma, and his rise from slave to shepherd. It is the gospel incarnate. The last shall be first, the stone rejected becoming the cornerstone. What then does Callixtus whisper to us across the millennia? In an age when rigour and mercy often clash like thunderheads, he reminds us that the church is not a fortress of the pure, but a hospital for the wounded. His life, scarred yet luminous, challenges us to embrace the prodigal in ourselves and others, to forgive not 7 times, but 77. As the early church fathers like Irenaeus taught, the episcopal office is one of unity, drawing all into the embrace of the one who dined with tax collectors and raised the dead. Callixtus, in his frailty and fortitude, embodied that call. And so, as we conclude this episode of History of the Popes, let us pause in gratitude for this humble giant. May his intercession guide us through our own trials, urging us toward that mercy which alone can heal a divided world. Join us next time as we explore another chapter in this sacred chronicle.